again. Looks like we got a lot of new folks here today. In any case, if you are interested, this is the Peer-Centered discussions with Meet the Authors, I guess. And today we're talking to Terese Thonus and Rebecca Day Babcock about their book, Researching the Writing Center. Have it right here. Excellent book. I've been enjoying reading it for the last little bit. And also thinking about projects that I could be doing, evidence-based projects. But just a little overall, the tiny chat system is pretty straightforward to use. If you do want to hook up your microphone or your camera, you basically just click on the Start Broadcasting button up at the top, and that'll let you join in the audio part of the discussion. You don't have to. You can stay down in the text box if you want. One of the things that I'll be doing, I'm not sure if the people who are recording it are here, but one thing I'll be doing is also reading any questions that you have. Okay, yep, there you are. I see you. You missed recording. I'll be reading out any questions that pop up on the screen as well, so that we can have different modalities here represented. But yeah, feel free to pop in with a question. If you don't want the little pop sound going off all the time, just click on the little checkbox where it says sounds and tick that off, and that pop sound will go away. But yeah, feel free to jump in with any questions. I just started out with some where I just set up a few that I was thinking of myself. That's the kind of benefit of being the moderator here, is you get all your own questions asked first, I guess. So sorry about that. But if you all in the text world there want to introduce yourselves, please feel free to let people know where you're from, and then I'll just hop right into the questions. But maybe Rebecca and Terese, why don't you introduce yourselves, and I'll shut up for now.
Hi, my name is Terese Thonus. I'm actually the Writing Center Director at the University of Kansas. This is my 6th year in that position. Before that, I was a professor, associate professor actually, of linguistics at California State University, Fresno for 10 years. And before that, I worked at East Carolina University in the English department.
Rebecca Day Babcock. Now I wonder if this mic is working.
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can make it louder.
Oops.
Oops, that went quiet.
Basin, where I teach linguistics and writing. And it's actually my first job, my first tenure-track job. I graduated from Indiana University of Pennsylvania in 2005 with my PhD in English, in a focus in, I guess they call it composition and TESOL.
Excellent. Yeah, we lost the first little bit, but I think you're fine now, Rebecca. Just to start off, I mean, I don't know if you've seen I think it's the latest edition of the Writing Center Journal, but it has an article, and I didn't write the title down, and I can't find it here, but it's by Dana Lynn Driscoll and Sherry Lynn Perdue, I think, and they did this study, and they came out with the only basically 6% of the articles in Writing Center Journal from 1980 to 2009 were, for what we'll call here, evidence-based. They use the RAD, an acronym, but in your first chapter, you also comment on that, about that particular problem, and it's kind of interesting to see an actual evidence-based article, right, about the lack of evidence-based research in our work. But in your first chapter, you also talk about that there can be this evidence-based stuff as well as a rather older approach or an artistic approach. How do you see those two blending together? And first, you can also comment on that 6% if you wish.
Well, I'll begin if it's all right, Rebecca. I think that there is a place for anecdote. There is a place for personal narrative, and we, in our book, talk a little bit about this as teacher research. In other words, you're in a context where you are actually working with writers in a writing center. You can speak with some authority to your practice and to the outcomes of that practice. What we urge, however, is not merely comments along the line of, in our writing center we do this, but rather do a systematic study of that experience as a teacher consultant and connect it with other research that's been done by others to actually come to some conclusions that are worth more than just what our writing center can get out of it. Rebecca, maybe you have some additional comments.
Well, I was thinking about what we found. Terese and I are also doing some other research where we're looking at what fields writing center directors come from. And we also mentioned in our book, I think, that many writing center directors come from the humanities fields, where this kind of research that we're talking about is not really done in the humanities fields, or let's say literature scholars are not trained in this type of research. So they're continuing the kind of research that they're used to, and it's probably just a reflection of the fields that many writing center directors come from, which are the fields of literature. And I can't remember, Terese, right now the exact percent, but I believe it was about half we found. Almost half, or about half of the writing center directors come from the literature field.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think the historical background of writing center work also speaks to the type of scholarship that most of us in writing center work do. And we talk about it as being humanistic and artistic. And we don't seek to denigrate that kind of scholarship. We just seek to move the field towards a reliance more on that RAD based scholarship. And Rebecca, RAD is something that I keep forgetting the acronym. What does it mean?
Replicable, aggregable, and I forget the D.
Data-driven.
Data-driven.
And
yeah, data-driven.
I think Purdue and colleagues' article is, we actually refer in the book, I believe, to a conference presentation that we attended, which is very exciting. And it stood out to us because the previous kind of searches of the Writing Center Journal that we had heard of were, very interesting. Neil Lerner did a study of, what is the most cited article from the Writing Center Journal, and of course it's Andrea Lunsford's Collaboration Control and the Idea of a Writing Center. And that tells us something about our field and the field of people who are interested in writing center work, but it doesn't really tell us about writing center scholarship itself. And that's why we wrote the book.
Yeah, sorry, I had to handle some folks who are hanging out in another chat room. I just had to bring them over here. Well, and that's interesting in itself. I mean, I'm thinking in terms of what, is there, first off, let's get to the literature one. Is there room for, some sort of literary analysis or that sort of thing in the work we do? And then I want to get to the more, maybe some of the problems with that we currently have with some of our practice that isn't so much evidence-based, but maybe say lore-based.
I have an idea. I don't know if Terese, if I've shared this with you, but where we could actually combine a more literature-based approach with the type of research we're advocating, because I see in tutorial sessions that tutors and tutees create a reading of a text. Say they're reading a story or a novel, and they create this reading together as they're talking. I think someone could study that, and that would be wonderful. And I don't think anyone has really studied the way that a tutor and a tutee create a reading of a literary text together. So there's an idea of how we could combine it.
Yeah, that would be a wonderful research project right there. And as a linguist, an applied linguist, I don't have training in that kind of text-based analysis of literary texts. And so I think that would be very exciting. I could learn a lot from that.
Yeah, I was thinking, because I was having a discussion about this, is that, you know, say looking at transcripts and looking at sessions, and you know, there is some amount that I think that we can apply in the humanities to what we observe and how we observe sessions that go on, and also making bigger connections to, say, different ideas. But let's get back to the rad stuff here, I guess, the evidence-based. I'm curious. Well, you know, we have our writing center lore. We have several received notions of things, right, that we're supposed to be doing. Let's take an example, directiveness versus non-directiveness. That's always the one that always comes up. What kind of role does this evidence-based research, or what does it show even about, say, directive versus non-directive?
Rebecca, I'm going to ask you to start the answer to that, along with outlaw tutoring, if you don't mind.
Sure. The irony is outlaw tutoring, the article that I wrote about this topic, is really a theoretical article rather than a research-based article. But I'm going to say, just off the top of my head, that the first article that really did that was the Guilt-Free Tutoring by Blau, Hall, and Sparks. And that was, I want to say, 2002 Writing Center Journal. It might have been 2001. And that, to me, was really the article that was based on research that came out and said, look, when tutors do non-directive tutoring, it actually confuses students. It frustrates students. Because if the student doesn't know the answer, any amount of questioning is not going to draw an answer out of a student that the student doesn't have inside. It's only going to create frustration. So I think that article, I believe, was the first one to really point that out. And then in my own research, I found similar things. Blau, Hall, and Sparks were working with second language learners, and in my research, I was working with deaf learners, and also I had a student with a learning disability. That the same thing. That non-directive tutoring just frustrated students. And in outlaw tutoring, I claim that we may actually be violating the law if we don't provide more directive proofreading and editing to students with certain disabilities. And I think research is just going to show probably the same thing over and over, that that non-directive tutoring really works great for students who are trying to come up with ideas about what to write about. But for things like what preposition to use, if you're a non-native speaker, it's not really going to help.
I'd like to add to that. My earliest research was in writing centers, had to do with second language writers. And I found many of the same things Rebecca found. I think my original interest in this issue was reading writing center tutoring guides and writing center theory as kind of a curious writing center tutor as a graduate student, and saying to myself, this doesn't sound like what's going on in at least my tutoring of second language writers. And I began to observe tutoring of first language and first language tutees and tutors, and ask myself, is it true that tutors are truly non-directive or indirect? And you know, began doing transcript recording and analysis, and kind of came up with the idea, maybe even as early as 1995, that there's something different about the reality of tutoring as compared to the way we're supposed to do it. And I think when I look at articles like Jeff Brooks' classic piece on, you know, minimalist tutoring, letting the student do all the work, I think it's a great idea, but I wanted to see actual proof or examples of that in writing center practice, and found that, you know, tutors in general are directive, and that maybe that's not such a bad thing. all the time. There may be different kinds of directiveness needed.
I think there's one study that comes to mind, and I don't know the citation, but I think it's Lynn Ann Briggs, the one where she did a case study of she was tutoring a single student, and they were peers in age, and they were talking. The student was writing, I think, a memoir, and they tutored on equal terms. But I think it's quite rare, and in my research, I only found one dyad who really tutored on equal terms, like both offering ideas and brainstorming as equals, and they were both peers in age, sex, race. They were true peers, and they were both men. Actually, it was the only male dyad that I found. So I don't think that it's impossible. And I think in the Lynn Ann Briggs study too, they were peers. They were both peers in age, race, sex. So perhaps these relationships are possible, but maybe in the majority of the time, it's not true peer tutoring. And I really like what Nita's comment that we should be outlaw tutoring outside of disabilities and non-native speakers too. Maybe good comment.
Well, yeah, and certainly I think one thing that could be tested is, the notions of where we're at as far as our practice goes in working with writers and how we respond to them, that to some extent we cannot be hidebound by rules that really are just kind of intuitive. The idea, I think, behind non-directiveness is there is that kind of sneaking authorial notion from expressivist work in there, but I also think that it's just a means of saying, well, we don't want to tell people what to do. We want them to make decisions themselves as writers. We want to help them become a better writer, right? I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing either, but I think what we need to test is how we're going about helping the writer to become a better writer. Because even if you think about it, what you were saying, Rebecca, with where peer tutoring comes from in our sense, Bruffy, he's dealing with, in a sense, true peers in a classroom setting, not in a writing center. That's one thing that I think is often kind of glossed over with Bruffy. But, that brings up, I don't want to stick on directivist versus non-directiveness, but I think, what other sort of received notions do we have in writing centers that do need to be tested better?
The term received notions I really like because it gets away from the idea of lore, which I think many writing center professionals or tutors think of as something negative. And in fact, lore itself or received notions are not negative and untrue necessarily, but they come from a particular context, a particular group of people experiencing writing support in a particular way that is not always generalizable beyond that immediate setting. And that's why Rebecca and I take quite a bit of time in the book explaining, for example, what a case study methodology actually is, explaining, what grounded theory is, explaining what we mean by observation and reflection, because we want the work that people do to be not only applicable to their own setting or context, but somehow communicate to the rest of the writing center community something that will be useful to us as a community. To answer your question, and again, I'm sorry, I just jumped right onto the received notions. In our chapter, what is a successful tutorial, we try to separate out that tutoring, writing center tutoring, makes a better writer versus makes a better writing. And one of the things we found there is that we could not really distinguish between one and the other, that there wasn't a clear definition of those two terms such that we could pull research in and say, well, this shows that it gives better writing, creates better writers, and this other one shows that it creates better writing. So that's one of the problems. We found it very difficult to distinguish among those between those terms.
We also have to figure out what it is that we're measuring. And I'm an advocate. I don't know if we want to get into politics here, but I'm an advocate of the IWCA coming out with outcome statements like other organizations have done, so we know just what it is that we're measuring, because in order to say if we're doing what we think we're doing, we have to have a goal, we have to have an objective, and then we have to know how we're measuring it to know what the outcomes are. And we have to all kind of agree a little bit on what it is that we want to happen, so we know what we're going to measure and how we're going to measure it. So,
we don't
and one of the things we mentioned,
style, right, Rebecca? We don't want to cramp anyone's style or be research Nazis. You know, this is good research, this is bad research.
But what, like our question, what is a successful tutorial? A lot of studies measuring writer satisfaction or tutor satisfaction. Is that really what we want to measure? I'm not saying it is or it isn't, just asking the question. Do we want to say successful tutoring means the writer is satisfied? Or do we want to say it means the paper is better? But then by who gets to decide, oh, that paper is better than that paper?
And unless you have some widely accepted standards, I guess, for, you know, outcomes, it's very difficult to make any clear, replicable decisions about that in research.
I really like the Schmidt and Alexander article that they actually came up with an instrument. And I know, Terese, you probably have the citation there.
I think
it's last year, maybe 2012, they came up with an article in a Journal of Assessing Writing where they came up with an instrument that we can use to measure writing tutorial. I think it's writing efficacy. Is that what it was?
Yeah, it's writer self-efficacy, which is self-efficacy is a measurement that comes out of education, Bandura, where students could talk about their growth in terms of their own self-assessment. And Schmidt and Alexander pulled this as a way to, how would you say it, Rebecca?
To measure the outcomes. If we say the goal of the session is for the writer to feel empowered that they can write better or to believe that they can do this, then we can use this instrument that Schmidt and Alexander came up with to pre-test the students before tutoring and then post-test them after tutoring to see if their writerly self-efficacy, that's what it is, I think, if their writerly self-efficacy actually improves through tutoring, if that's what we want the goal of tutoring to be, that people feel better about themselves as writers. I'm sure that we can come up with goals that everyone can agree with in response to Leah. There must be some outcomes out there that everyone can agree that it's a good thing to feel better about yourself as a writer. We probably could all agree on that.
And yeah, just to make sure everybody got that, Leah's question there is, would standard/outcomes be tied to WC's demographic? What would the universal standards even look like?
Most other organizations have these standards, and the WPA has a whole book of outcome statements, and they're created by consensus, and they're the types of things that everyone sort of agrees that would be a good idea. Students can master various rhetorical genres, or just for an example, something like that we could all pretty much agree on.
Yeah, sorry, I was just looking back through the list there and see if there were any other questions, comments. Hang on one second. My phone was ringing. Any other things that we do in Writing Center work? Again, that get back to this notion of received notions, what we do that seem to be pretty untested. I mean, while I was reading the text and I started thinking about the work we do, I was just wondering around if we're all in Writing Centers just kind of wandering around making intuitive decisions on what we see happening in our center. Thoughts?
Clint, there is Writing Center assessment, and Rebecca and I, have talked about assessment a lot, and I think there's been a real growth in Writing Center assessment work over the past 5 years. And you'll have to help me with the references here, but Bill McCauley and colleague have a book out, edited volume on this. There's been some really good work on Writing Center assessment. And I guess I want to make clear that in the beginning of our book, we try to distinguish between Writing Center assessment as a local activity and Writing Center research as what we might call a global activity. And so assessment is wonderful, and I think there's so much we have to learn about it. Research, however, I think has a different mind frame. We have to know the literature. We have to seek literature inside our field and outside our field. One of the strengths, I think, of our book is we look at every field from nursing to, special education to, peer tutoring of content, to try to find ideas about how people have researched the big topics of our field. And so we feel like we're not just gazing at our belly buttons anymore, but we're trying to situate Writing Center research within a larger research framework.
Well said.
And I just put Roberta's link for the ACRL about literacy standards for higher education down there.
Oh, thank you.
One thing that the writing centers do that, to some extent, this is not so much lore as it could be textual as well, is writing centers tend to engage in a lot of reflective practice, particularly with tutors. Tutors most of the time will end up writing a session report, and they'll write out, we do here. I'll be anecdotal at this point because I have no data on this. But here, the SLCC Student Writing Center, students write a report after, or the tutors write a report after every session, and it's reflective. They think about the work they're doing. What role does that sort of work play, or is that just more stuff that we can't, study because it's so complex?
Rebecca, here's where I think you need to talk about teacher research.
Yes, I think that exactly what you're talking about, Clint, is teacher research, or in this case we could call it tutor research. The thing that separates research from other types of activities is in research we have a focus, we have a research question. So the tutors could just take random notes, or they could be focusing on a particular item or a research question. And after they have their tutoring session, they could reflect in their notes, and then they could go back over and read those notes and decide to try something different maybe next time, to specifically say, okay, this didn't work, I'm going to try this next time, and then I'll reflect over that in my notes. So it seems like they're almost already doing tutor research if they're doing that. And in a famous book, one of the only books about writing centers that actually portrays this type of research is called At the Point of Need by Marie Wilson Nelson, and that's 1991. I recommend for anybody to get that book. What they did in their writing center is they had groups. It wasn't really the type of tutoring we think of because it was group tutoring with graduate students and I think developmental writers, and they would get together and every semester talk about what they were seeing and what was going on, and then refine their practices for the next semester, and then that group would do the same. So it was just constantly improving their practice through reflection, getting together in focus groups, talking about what they were doing. So I really recommend that book to anybody, and I think your tutors are probably 80 to 85% there already with doing tutor research. They probably just need to focus on particularly what they're looking at, just not randomly looking at everything. Thanks again with the citations.
Thanks for the link.
Clint, we were actually surprised when we wrote this part of the book that there was so little. I think we found 3 sources in the Writing Center literature that had done anything like this in a research framework, which is really strange. Yeah, 3, which is really strange. Yeah.
Yeah, that's less than 6% too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I have to say, one's an ERIC report that was only published as an ERIC report. One is a dissertation from South Africa, and one is the book that I just told you about. So we're doing it every day. Why aren't people writing it up? That's my question for the group.
Well, and here I think, as Rebecca explained Nelson's book, it was done in a reiterated, systematic way. Not just, okay, we're just going to look at this semester and let's write up a, you know, a quick thing for, posterity. It was very systematic. It was connected to teaching of basic and ESL writers. So there was some kind of grounding in research that they connected their reflection to.
Yeah, one of the things that I've kind of thought about, it'd be interesting to test as well, aside from what well, that is what the tutor is gaining out of that session, or gaining out of their experience in working in a writing center, working with writers, and trying to be a little bit more evidence-based about that. And I do a lot of interviews with tutor, and I've been coding some of those things. But it's a lot like you talked about with writers. What are you gaining out of this? I want to kind of I'm being much more specific in what's going on and what they're telling me, and maybe even trying to figure out different ways of looking at that too. It makes me, and I also think about, well, actually, is there anything else about that? Anybody out there on the text world? Do you have any questions about what we've talked about so far, or anything that's coming up? Or feel free to jump in with any question anywhere. This discussion is all up to you guys and gals.
My question still is, if anyone can answer it, if everyone is doing this, and a lot of people are doing this, why isn't it being written up? Is it lack of time, lack of interest? Maybe people think no one else will be interested in what they're doing? Because I know it's, and then also, Clint, you brought me to a question that I've been asking myself, and I was asking Terese, how does being a tutor help second language learners improve their English, or the language that they're tutoring in if they're a second language speaker? So that's a question that no one has tried to answer, that I want someone to answer, because I want to know.
Yeah, it's almost as if I think we in the Writing Center world come up with a lot of great hypotheses and research questions, but we don't necessarily push forward with them. I'm thinking in terms of everything we've talked about right up till now. Also, there's stuff that we get right. I'm thinking in terms, you talk about it's in the tutoring different populations, and you talk about in one of the recommendations for practice, you mention how tutors don't have to be grammar experts to be effective, right? And that's been an assumption of Writing Center work for a long time. Is that no, you don't need to be that grammar expert in order to be able to work with writers. So I think, well, anyway, I'll let you comment on that.
It's nice when the lore is proven by research, and I think Thompson and colleagues did the same. Thompson and colleagues, with their 2009 study, they proved a lot of the lore is actually true. Like, consultants have to make this tutee feel comfortable. They have to allow the tutee to ask questions, and I forget the exact findings of that study, but it's nice when lore is justified by research.
I think that's very exciting, and I think maybe one of the reasons that we're afraid of research as a community is that we're afraid that none of our lore will be, or as you said, received notions will be shown to be correct. And I think there's just as much a possibility that those received notions are intuitively and rad-ishly supported as not.
Yeah, and I think Anne has a good comment there. I wonder if the itinerant nature of consulting makes research difficult, as well as she mentions, well, that was David, sorry. And then Anne says, I wonder which comes first, practice or the question. And I think there is a lot. Like I said, I think a lot of times we come up with this is a great idea, we're just going to apply it without really testing it.
We've had an exciting new development. We're actually using this book at our Writing Center. We have 40 tutors, 20 graduate, 20 undergraduate, and we've decided that our monthly practicum with our tutors is going to consist of, it's usually 2 hours on a Friday once a month, that each month we're going to take 1 hour, and research groups will meet then and also online to investigate a question of interest. and that this will flow directly into conference, presentation submissions, maybe the tutors column in the Writing Lab newsletter, maybe something in PeerCentered, you know, that there'll be a constant culture of research.
I'm actually the director of undergraduate research at my institution, and in another book that I have, a synthesis of qualitative studies of writing centers, that was actually written with undergraduates on a research team, and two of the undergraduates who were on that team, one has gone on to her master's degree, one has gone on to his PhD, and it took us about maybe 6 years to write the book, and undergraduates stayed with the program all those years, even after graduating and going on to other things. So I think, I hate to disagree, but I do think it's possible for undergraduates to continue with a project past their graduation, because it's happened.
I agree.
It's happened to me. But we did have some undergraduates who dropped out of the project and never heard from again. So it's not everyone that's going to continue.
Mm-hmm. What we've said with these research groups in our Writing Center is, even after you graduate, your name is still on this project. Even if it takes 3 semesters or 3 years to complete the project, your name is always going to be associated with it. And you can use it, however you want.
Put it on your resume.
That's right.
Yeah, and there are, there are venues now, aside from, there's of course the National Conference on Peer Tutoring and Writing, where undergraduates could present to peer tutors, but there's also the Undergraduate Research Conference that I know is getting quite big, and so there are venues for undergraduates to participate, and I think we're seeing that grow. I remember when I was an undergraduate, there was precious little, emphasis on doing any of this kind of work. That was all like, no, you don't do that stuff. You wait till you're in grad school.
Or it's so
which I
beyond
find really exciting.
what you can try. I mean,
yeah.
But we know differently, don't we?
We certainly do, and I think, ultimately, I think. I would like to test this. I'd like to find out. But I think places like writing centers where undergraduates take more action and get involved more in education and have had an influence on the rest of higher ed, because they see, hey, these are peers, these are undergraduates working here. But I'd have to test that. Now I feel like I'm having to test everything that I'm saying.
Clint, one of the fastest chapters for us to write, I think the fastest chapter, of course it's the shortest one, but it was super fun to write and very quick, was Chapter 8, An Agenda for Writing Center Research. I mean, literally, we sat down, and I think in 2 hours we drafted the chapter, because it's so easy to think of questions. I mean, all you have to do is, think for about 2 seconds, and you can come up with a researchable question about writing center practice, theory, So thank you. It's short, but it's full of ideas. I've had a couple of our writing center consultants jump on them already. So.
And Clint, I want to respond to your kind of comment about not overthinking everything, or not having to research everything, or making everything a question. Terese and I were interviewed by Brad Hughes, and he really put me on the spot, and he said, well, what percentage of what you do is actually based on research, in the classroom or in tutoring sessions? And I had to be honest, not everything that I do is based on research. Of course not. It would be impossible. It's just something to keep in mind, but it's not something to stifle you or stop you from doing whatever you feel at the moment, whatever you feel would be best for a student. To say, oh, I can't do that because I haven't researched it.
Well, and it's also, to some extent, I think I can sit here and go, ooh, I don't have any evidence for that yet, but there it is, yet. I can I can say things, but then I can go out and look and see and set up whatever to figure out if it's true. I mean, I could probably rather readily do something to figure out if what I just claimed has any validity. That the writing centers have had an influence on academia. But Karen Jackson had a question. How do you balance doing meaningful research to us with what administrators value? Excellent question.
It is an excellent question. I think that's why in the beginning of the book we discuss, when we talk about theory, practice, and what's in between, we talk about assessment and research and assessment again. Because I think when you ask what administrators value, that means you have to assess what you as a writing center are doing. I have found it very useful in assessing what our writing center does to appeal to writing center research and bring that in and say, you know what we found here is, quite representative, or, click on this article. Another thing, and then we talk about research, which is where you go and, ask bigger questions. But then the research comes back again and influences the questions that you ask and try to answer about the assessment of your particular writing center. So I see there's a symbiotic relationship between assessment and research. I don't know if I answered your question, Karen, but Rebecca probably has more to say about that.
Oh, I just think a lot of times the stuff that we have to do anyway for our jobs, it's not related to writing centers, but I've had some questions about things in the classroom, like what causes students to be successful in a particular class, and I've done research on that, and then I've turned around and had it published, but it was stuff that I needed to know for my class. Most times people will say yes, unless they're very, very busy. It's just much more rewarding to write together with colleagues and kind of push each other to get it done.
Hear, hear.
I will say that Rebecca is a fabulous person to write with because she is driven, let me tell you. I'm interested in nitpicky details, and I love that kind of thing, but Rebecca kept us on schedule, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, and our writing center work has actually have quite a few collaborative pairs like Andrea Lunsford and Lisa Eade, as well as the Everyday Writing Center 5, right? So there's quite a few folks who work together. That's one thing that, again, I think writing center work has a lot of collaborative nature. But Anne, I want to get to her question. Are there particular benefits / challenges to collaborating with WCs at peer institutions?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Can you explain?
Well, Anne explains. I got one for you. I'm thinking in terms of, you deal with Chapter 8 research questions that are coming up, but do you think, I'll just put it in a straightforward way, are there any other sacred cows of writing center work that you think need to be examined? And there, Anne, you can think of that one, and then Anne says, I am thinking in terms of research burdens and increasing the generalizability of a study.
Well, I can answer Clint's question, Terese, about the one that really, the one that I really held was the required visits. I used to think required visits are just terrible. They're just awful. We shouldn't do them. What a nasty thing to do. But every single study that studied required visits have found that they're actually good. So that's one we really need to let go of. And it was hard for me to let go of it, but when I saw the evidence in my face, I had to, change my idea.
Yeah, that was mine. I agree, and I was going to say I agree with that one completely. I'm still kind of squeamish about it, but I just say, you know what? This is what it says, and you know what? Yeah, and what I'm seeing is actually a benefit. Overall, yeah, there are some folks who are really, they can be difficult, but overall, from the numbers I've looked at, they have a great time and they do well.
And we need to look at the context of those research studies on required visits. Again, we're mostly looking at first-year students, right? And we generalize from that, but it would be interesting to see, for example, if a class of graduate students were required to use the Writing Center. And that might really, change our view of that. Who knows?
Hey, that might be
Yeah,
good.
yeah, exactly. And I think there is, to some extent, a little bit of confirmation bias in there because, we all know the session where a student is difficult to work with or they're not engaged, and then all of a sudden you find out, oh, you were required to come here. So automatically our anecdotal evidence overrides any sort of numbers that we might even want to look into because it was such a crappy experience, and I understand that.
Yeah, you're quite right.
Let's get to Anne's question. And again, I'll repeat it. Are there particular benefits/challenges to collaborating with WCs at Peer Institutes? And then she says, I am thinking in terms of research burdens and increasing the generalizability of a study. Sorry, I can't talk.
Let me give an example, and I hope this will be helpful. I'm part of the Greater Kansas City Writing Center group, and we were so enchanted by Schmidt and Alexander's study on tutor self-efficacy that we corresponded with the authors about the possibility of adapting their survey instrument for tutors. So we've been looking at tutor self-efficacy, and we've been using that particular survey instrument for the last 3 semesters at several community colleges and 2 research universities in our consortium. So yes, it does, from my experience, it does, I think, increase the generalizability of study outcomes, but there always has to be one person who kind of coordinates it, and that person has to have plenty of time. I hope that's a good answer.
Yeah, any other questions from the text crowd out there? Because I got one that's kind of a kickoff one in some ways. Are there any resources, here's one from Karen, are there any resources more likely to fund WC assessment research?
Are you talking about whether like IWCA or 4Cs or another organization, NCTE, might fund assessment, or are you talking about assessment research? I don't quite understand what you mean. Oh, in addition to IWCA? Wow. I mean, I would look at 4Cs, and they definitely have research initiatives going on. I've submitted a couple times to that. Rebecca and I also submitted to American Council of Learned Societies, ACLS, collaborative research grant. We didn't get accepted for that, but they do have a collaborative grant. They might be interested in multi-campus assessment initiatives. I don't know.
I have one. It's the IES, the Institute of Education Sciences. They're trying to fund big deal research, like $1 million. And I actually have applied for one of those to start a Writing Fellows program. So Karen, I could talk to you about that. It is Karen, right? I could talk to you about that further if you're interested in that. But the Institute of Education Sciences has a lot of money to give away, and they want to study all kinds of stuff. And higher education, I think success in higher education in writing is one of their focus areas that they're trying to study. So I think it might fit right in there and get a lot of money for that.
Doesn't look like we have any questions coming up yet, but I do have one that's we're getting close to the time, but I want to maybe not wrap up with this question, but I want to talk about what about those folks who are at institutions who are not necessarily privileged to do research, and I'm talking about either, say high schools, elementary schools, as well as, say, even community colleges. You know, a lot of us Writing Center folks at community colleges have massive teaching loads on top of doing our Writing Center work. But also at many of our community colleges, and I'm not talking down about community colleges, I am at one, many of them do not, however, privilege research. In fact, years back, and this is years back, it's no longer the case, but we were told by our college president that you shouldn't be doing that research stuff. So it was like, okay. But in any case, I'm curious, you know, what's the benefit of research for, say, a community college writing center, a high school writing center, an elementary school writing center, when it's, you know, administrators aren't saying you have to go out and do that. And you know, and frankly, it's not, I don't know, what do you think about that?
I have to tell you, I'm probably not the person to ask because I have a research mind, and the times when I've had jobs that didn't require me to do research, I just would go out and do it anyway for fun. So I would have to say if I had a job that did not require me to do research, I would just do it anyway on my own time, just because my curiosity wouldn't let me not do it. So I'm probably not the person to ask that.
Again, I think that my first department I'm trying to think of this in English, sorry. The first department that I reported to here at KU was Student Affairs, and it's kind of strange, a writing center in Student Affairs. I know it happens somewhere, but not everywhere. And they asked a question like, why do you do research? And I was like, because it's what people in my field do. And there's like, why aren't you in academic affairs? Well, thankfully, we are now in academic affairs. So when I go to do assessments or talk about Writing Center work, I can say, you know what, we just published a book on that. Or, you know, I have a great article in the Writing Center Journal that deals with that exact question that you're asking me. You know, and guess what? The Writing Center at UCLA just did this or that or the other. And just being on my toes, you know, and fresh about what's going on, I think makes me a more valuable employee to the institution. Does it take time? Mm-hmm. You need to carve out time. You need to, I'm speaking for myself, and I know Rebecca does this too. I have afternoons or mornings in my schedule that are completely blocked out for research. Do not talk to me. I do not answer the phone. I do not answer email. And I know people are going, ah! But the fact is, if I don't have that 4 solid hours, I'm not going to make any headway on anything.
I want to make a suggestion too, and maybe you heard the dog bark. People who are in elementary school writing centers or who are in high school writing centers could partner with someone at a university who is required by their job to do research. So that person is probably looking for a research location, a research site, or even someone who's maybe working on their doctoral dissertation. I know when I was working on my doctoral dissertation, it was very difficult for me to find research sites who wanted to welcome me in. So if you have an elementary writing center, a high school writing center, welcome in a PhD student to do research with you, or an assistant professor who has to do research to get promoted. There's plenty of people out there who are just dying to do research and are looking for a partner or a place to do it.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think, you know, and I've had several folks come into our writing center and do that. One of the things that, you know, to go along with what you're saying is that the reason that I engage in this kind of work, I mean, you know, again, nobody's saying do this or you're out sort of thing. I do it because I see it's a sort of essential part of what a writing center is. We're about learning, and how we have to, it's not just about the writers learning, it's about us learning about our craft, our practice, whatever. You know, and I think there is, for example, a room to study our lore, our anecdotal evidence, and understand what all that means. But we just, you know, we have to do it in the sense of we can't just sort of let it sit there and oh, everything's going to be A-okay, let's just do what we were doing in 1980. I don't see how that even makes sense in an academic writing center context.
Correct.
I do think writing centers need to take themselves or ourselves seriously as any other field does, where fields research on what it is that they do. That's what biology does, that's what chemistry does, that's what second language learning does, education especially. So that's pretty much our argument, that we need to take what we do seriously and look at it.
We literally begin the book with a quote from Muriel Harris, and actually this is the title of a piece that she wrote. Oh goodness. Is it meeting at the head table? Let me look it up.
Finding a place at the head table,
Finding
perhaps?
a place at the head table.
I don't know it.
Where she basically makes the same argument. Here we go. Preparing to sit at the head table. And I'll write down the reference here, where she basically makes that argument. Why do we think we're second-class academics? We work with students from every discipline in many cases, and everyone from freshmen to PhD students, depending on where we work. Like you do, Clint, many writing centers work with community members as well. So we have an exposure to writing in its broadest sense. Why should we think we don't have anything to contribute to the academic conversation?
Exactly, and I think that's a lovely place to stop our discussion. I mean, there's so much more we could talk about. Anything down to like IRBs and all that sort of stuff, as well as just interesting research projects we might be engaging in. But it would be, I'm sure that that if folks read your book, and we can perhaps have another discussion later next year. I don't know if people are interested. It seems like this is a really great attendance. I'm really surprised, and I know this is one area that I'm really excited about, because oftentimes, like I said, I think there's a squeamishness about research, that it's somehow going to expose the problems with writing centers, rather than helping us to learn about how to make writing centers more effective. Because I think, ultimately we could test our basic idea, right, about what we do. Is it effective? But I think we are doing that, and I think we're learning from that. So that's the most exciting part. But are there any final thoughts from either of you on the subject?
We are just so excited about the reception the book has that people have given the book. And I think, I'll speak for myself, but maybe Rebecca can follow up. Our job was actually fairly easy in writing this book. We basically decided that we were going to do a meta-analysis of the field and get together everything we could find. We have some problems with not getting everything, I'm sure, but we did our best, and it was to kind of give people a taste for this. Some kind of a kick in the direction. So we're very happy that people are interested in the work.
Yes, and the fact that to hear it inspiring people to do research, that was our goal, really, was to inspire other people to do research, or to pick it up and say, hey, we can do this. This is something that's doable. I can try this myself. You can try this at home. So we're very pleased that people have been, answering the call and getting started with research.
Well, thank you all for coming. We have 2 discussions this week. On this Thursday, we have Frankie Condon's I Hope to Join the Band. And I can't remember the exact time, but if you check on either the PeerCentered page, peercentered.org, or the Facebook page, if you're a friend on Facebook there, you can check there. But that should be a great discussion as well with Frankie. And it's interesting, because that text deals with narrative and lore in some ways that perhaps can give us a chance to think about it in context of what research is ultimately. But thank you again, Rebecca and Terese, and everyone else for attending. This is pretty exciting. If you want to keep up the discussion, you can, like I said, like us on the Facebook page. You can post stuff there. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting us.